Hello everyone, welcome to our first webinar of 2025. Yeah, I got it right. This is going to be our first in our Study Less, Pass More series, the 6 biggest exam prep mistakes and how to avoid them. And I'm going to bring our exam guru, Jon Dunckley, on the stage. Hi Jon, you okay?
I'm good. I'm not sure I qualify as a guru on anything, but I'll take it. Thank you.
We'll take it. I mean, you told me something. We'll make you embarrassed in a minute. But just before we get started, there's a chat box on the right. We would like to encourage questions all the way through. We'll try and get through some of them. If we don't get through some of them today, we'll take it away, Jon, and answer them separately, if that's okay. But the first thing I want to know is who's taking an exam in 2025 is the first question. And which exams are you planning to take? So let's give it a few minutes and see what they say. So at the moment it's fairly quiet, but I'm sure here we go. So RO6, RO1, AF1, JO2, Feb 2025, RO6. This is amazing. Okay. Cool. Okay. So to give a bit of I mean, we don't really need to give you an introduction, Jon, but you've been in exams for years. You've written a book. I think you said yesterday on LinkedIn that you've been taking exams for 40 years, which I can't believe. For 30 years, you've been training people, and I want to know what your skincare routine is.
I should say, the 40 years goes back to the earliest exams I can remember studying for, which were my last ones at primary school. So I'm 50 now, so I've been doing exams since I was 10.
Okay, we'll let you off. Right, so this session is mainly going to be Jon, but what we want to do in all these webinars is we want to put all the value out there. So we really want to help you pass your exams in 2025. We've helped hundreds, I think it might be in over 1,000 now, Jon. With NextGen, we probably helped over 1,000 people. I need to get the stats. Pass exams within our community. We are, with Jon's help, pretty good at this. And we're going to give you all the value today. We're going to give you, if you're taking an exam in 2025, we're hopefully going to give you the best start. And there's also a bonus prize at the end because you've written a book, Jon, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. So, okay. So what we're going to talk about, 6 exam mistakes when you're preparing that Jon sees on a regular basis. We actually had a lot of mistakes that we first initially wrote, Jon, if you remember, but we've tried to instill it into 6 key mistakes that you see people make. What's your number one?
Okay, so if I can, I'm going to take a step back just before that, right? Because I think it's really important to understand this whole idea of study less, pass more, right? You only have so much time in a day. Your time's either going to be spent working, sleeping, or family/leisure, okay? Every hour that you want to spend or that you spend studying is an hour you're giving up from one of those 3 things. You're either sleeping less, you're spending less time with the family or on your leisure activities, or you're working less. So there's an investment that you're making. And I think all of the things that I'm going to talk about are all about trying to get the best return on investment. If you're going to make that decision to invest your time in study, you want to make sure that you get the best out of every hour that you spend on study. Any time that you spend just, shifting paper from one side of the desk to another, you've given up something else that you could have been doing. Okay, so that's what it all comes down to for me. So where are we going to go to then? Number one. Number one is not knowing the enemy. What do I mean by that? I see so often, I speak to people about the exams they're going to take, and I ask them, what do you understand about the exam? And they say, well, it's a tax exam. Okay. How long is it? How many marks are there? How long do you get for, to complete each section? What's the pass mark? How many people passed it last year? Right? What levels it set? That's a really important one. I mean, the difference between a level 3 exam and a level 6 or level 7 exam is massive. A level 3 exam is effectively what an AS level. A level 6 is a third-year undergraduate level. A level 7 is a master's level. So you think about the difference between an AS level and a master's degree. That's what you're looking at with some of these exams. So you need to understand where you're at. So it's kind of the way I would liken it is mistake one, not knowing the enemy. It's like saying that you're going to run a marathon, but not knowing whether that marathon is pancake flat or it's all going to be over mountains. Or even worse than that, sometimes saying you're going to run a marathon, but not knowing how long a marathon is. I have literally seen people in that kind of situation. So first thing I'd like people to do then is research the exam in as much detail as you can. Find out what level it's at. Find out what the makeup of the exam is. So how many questions are there going to be? How are those questions broken down? How long will you get for each question? That kind of thing. And what pass mark you're going to have to reach. And then try and find out, if you can, how many people hit it last year. I'm going to give you some numbers just to cement that. So if I look, for example, at RO1 and RO2, I know a lot of people in the chat there saying they're taking those exams. Both of them, 2-hour exams, 100 questions. And they're both level 4. So level 4 puts them at first-year undergraduate level. So you might think, well, they're kind of equivalent in difficulty. But there's only 13 multiple response questions in RO1, and there are 28 in RO2. And those multiple response questions are the ones where you've got to get all of the right parts to the question before you can get the 1 mark. So those are, objectively, those are harder questions. And you've got 28 of those in RO2 to only 13 in RO1. So on the face of it, they look like equivalent tasks, but really RO2 is a harder task. And so when lots of people say, oh, RO2 is such a difficult exam, well, that's part of the reason, right? There are more of those kind of questions. The other thing that kind of relates into that is the material that you're, well, yeah, there you go. Andy in the chat there saying RO2 was tough. It is tough, and that's part of the reason why it's tough, because you've got so many of those multiple response questions in there to try and get through. The next thing is in terms of just understanding from the examiner and using all of the different resources the examiner gives you to understand what they're looking for. But again, I'll give you some examples here. If we take AF1, for example, right? AF1 is the taxation, the advanced taxation and trusts exam. The CII reckons you need 150 hours of study to get through that one. That's 3 times as much study as it recommends that you need for an RO exam. So straight away, the examiner in their own material is telling you, look, we're not going to mess about. This is a tough exam. We're going to expect a lot from you. But then they'll give you some information to try and help you with that. Most people will tend to go straight to have a look at some of the past papers. I know past papers are a big thing. I get quite a lot of emails from people saying, have you got any extra past papers for AF1, AF4? What most people do when they get a past paper is look at the questions and then they look at the model answers. Okay, that's great. That will tell you the kind of format that they take, and it will give you an idea as to what the model answer is. And then they leave it there, though. The real gold in these past papers is before that. The real gold is in the examiner's commentary, because the examiner's commentary is literally the chief examiner saying, this is what happened when we gave people this paper. These are the things we wanted to see. This is what we did see. This is what was done really well. This is what was done really badly. And then very often they'll say things like, we're going to keep asking about this until grades improve. Great. Well, that's going straight on my revision schedule, because now I know that that's an area that they're not happy with and that they're going to keep asking me about. If you're not using that examiner's commentary at the start, you are missing out literally on the person who's going to mark the papers telling you how they're going to mark it. Hannah's asking, where do you find the examiner's commentary? So if you get a copy of one of the past papers, like this one here, AF1, the first section in it, it goes through some guidance notes to begin with in terms of how the exam works. And then you get a section, a few pages in, which is headed up examiner's commentary. And then that literally walks through question by question from the actual paper with all the examiner's notes in there, telling you what they liked, what they didn't like, what they want to see from you. So absolute gold.
I've got a question.
Yes.
So you talk about research here, researching the exam before you do it. So a lot of people, I remember I did it back in the day. You take multiple exams at the same time.
Yeah.
So are you doing that research before you go and book your exams,
Yes.
knowing yes you are? Is that right?
I would, at least to some extent. So one example there would be looking at where I can get extra bang for my buck in terms of the amount of study I do. So if you're doing AF1, right, the assumed knowledge for AF1 is going to be RO3, tax, and JO2 trusts. Now, most people that come into AF1 are really weak on trusts. You're going to have to learn up your trusts information anyway. So at that point, my research tells me, well, I might as well just go ahead and do JO2 at the same time as doing AF1 because there's so much overlap there. And one is going to help me with the other one there.
I think Hannah asked, where do you get past papers with examiners' comments for RO exams?
Right. So let me pick that one up as a separate issue now. I will come back to the AFs in a second because that highlights a really important point. For ROs, I get a lot of requests for past papers. There are no past papers, right? They do not exist. There's no such thing. The reason why they don't exist is because what the CII have got is basically a massive pool of questions. And when you sit down to take your exam and you fire up the session, it pulls questions out of their database in the right proportions. So you get the right number for syllabus 1, the right number for syllabus 2, right number for syllabus 3, etc. Okay? That means every exam is potentially different. So every year, what they do is they publish one example paper. That's not a past paper. There's no guarantee any of those questions will have actually been given to students, but the format is broadly the same and the depth is broadly the same and it's representative. Okay, and you can normally get 2 or 3 of those. So there's one that's on the CII website. If you just search CII RO1, for example, it'll take you to a page, and on there you'll find they call it a examiner's guide. There's one paper on there, but you can also do smart Googling, and a lot of people don't realize you can do this. So if you do cite, SITE, cii.co.uk, and then you type in after that any search term, it will only search on the CII's website for that thing. And you can then search for RO1 exam guide, and it will look for any RO1 exam guide that's available on CII. And quite often you'll find 2 or 3 by doing that.
Cool. We're only 12 minutes in. You've given about 3 or 4 absolute gold nuggets there. So, and we're only on the first point. So let's go on the second. Are we still on the first mistake?
Yeah, just one more thing in terms of that. One thing that I do, and this is for people that are coming through NextGen and are doing the AFs with us. One of the things that I've been doing for years is analysing all of the papers that they put out. So I go right back to April 2013. This is JO1. And I've got the breakdown of every question that's been asked in every paper since then. And that lets me know roughly how many marks are going to come up on each one of the syllabus areas. And that's one of the things that I walk through with our students on the classroom sessions.
Cool.
That's point 1.
Okay. Mistake 1 is basically you don't see people research the exam before they actually book it or take it.
Absolutely right. Mistake 1.
Okay.
Mistake 2 then. Reading wrong. People don't read properly. What do I mean by that? They read for an exam as if they're reading a novel. Okay. My kids set me a challenge when I turned 50. I've got to read the 50 best books of all time. There's some of them there. James Joyce, Ulysses. Terrible, terrible book. It's one of the ones that I've been forced to read by my kids. Awful, awful thing. Don't do it. But we read the study as if we're reading a novel. We start at the beginning and then we read through to the end. And that's completely the wrong way. It's because we're taught to read that way at school. Right? We're taught that's how you read a book. But actually, for study purposes, that's not the most effective way to read for a book. So stick to the Star Wars. Yeah, do you know what? I think I probably should stick to Star Wars. It's much better than Ulysses. So how should we read it? Well, if I take, for example, a CII textbook, JO5 in this case, my name inside it. If you look at the start of the chapter, what you'll find at the start of the chapter is that there are some key points. Okay, so there's a little introduction and there are some learning objectives. What is this chapter going to try and tell me? Read those first. Then flick to the end of the chapter. And at the end of the chapter, you've got two things. You've got one page that is key points. Read those next. And then, bizarrely enough, you've also got a couple of additional self-test questions. Read those. Now, that sounds counterintuitive because you've not read the material yet, but that's the best way to do it. Because reading the questions, what you then start to do is build scaffolding in your brain for the information that you're now going to read to build around. Okay, so you read the introduction, then you read the key points, have a look at the questions, then you go back to the start of the chapter and you still don't read. Now you flick through the chapter just looking at the headings. Right? Again, still building that scaffolding, giving yourself a little bit of an idea as to how much about this subject you know, where your shortfalls are. And what's a really useful thing to then do at this point, it's a little exercise where you can do it in one of two ways. There's something called the Feynman notebook. Feynman notebook method is basically you take a blank piece of paper, you put a title at the top of it, and then you try and explain that subject in words that a 9-year-old would understand. Okay? So if you're looking at that chapter and you're looking at some of the headings, you put that heading on your blank paper, and then before you've even read it, you try and write down what you know about it. If you find that you're able to easily explain that subject already, you're probably a long way down the line. But what you'll find is the ones that you're weaker on, you'll think, I've no idea, I wouldn't know where to start, I wouldn't know what to write. At that point, you know that's an area that you're going to have to concentrate on. Okay. Then you start to read. As you're reading through the chapter, don't make notes. Okay. The only notes you should be making, I'll talk about notes in a second, but the only notes you really should be making is just little pencil notes in the margin. Okay, concentrate on the reading, let it go in. Then at the end, come back and make your notes. Okay, so you're reading with purpose. And I guess that's the key for point 2. Read with purpose, juice the information, take what you need from it, don't treat it like a novel. Okay.
Okay, that's a very specific method. And I think we'll probably share that method, I think, after this webinar, because I think, you know, so there's no flexibility in that method for you. That's just the way to do it.
No, I think there is flexibility, and you'll find that certain things will work better than others. So you might not get on with the Feynman notebook method. You might just go back and start reading it. But I would always start at the beginning, look at the bit at the end if there are key points at the end, then flick through the headings, and that bit I would always do, and then I would start to read it. Okay, and I try and mix it up a little bit. Literally, just reading the book cover to cover is going to be futile.
So just asking the audience question here: what do you currently do when you get the study book? I think is a good question at this point, because we're trying to in a judgment-free way, John, help people pass more exams. That's what Absolutely. We're trying to do here. So I think, you know, there's no judgment right or wrong, but we'd love to hear what's working for you or what's not working. So if you want to put that in terms of the book. But number 2, really interesting. I mean, I've never ever come across that, John.
I think that you make a really important point there about, you know, no right or wrong way. You know, when you said, you know, is that a rigid way for me? There are no rigid ways. I think the thing about study, and I'm going to steal this from Professor Damien Hughes, but be rigid on the destination, but flexible on the route. I think that's a really important point, a really important way to look at it. You know where you want to get to, but sometimes you will meander around a little bit. I normally read it, forget it immediately, what I've just read. Exactly, and that's kind of the problem. So if you're not reading it with purpose and then making notes, which will be point 3, in the right way, you will forget what you've just read.
Okay, and Ian just throws his away. So yeah, that's quite easy. And Megan, I read the 360 workbooks and then complete chapter summary tests on the revision mate and then read book back to fill any gaps.
What's your thoughts on the CII textbook versus alternatives? Well, I'm in the process of writing some new ones, so hold that thought.
Yes.
I think the thing about the CII textbooks, and this is one of the reasons why reading cover to cover doesn't work, the CII textbooks are never intended to be and have never intended to be study texts. And that sounds counterintuitive, but because it says study text on the front of it, but they're really not. They're reference guides, right? They're not exam guides. They're not there to get you through an exam. They're there to give you the knowledge on a particular subject, and it will go beyond what you need to just get through the exam. Okay, so
cool. Right, Evelyn, any tips on these notes? It's like we put a plant in the audience. Mistake number 3.
Right, mistake number 3: making bad notes. Okay, so what we tend to do, and people do this a lot, is go crazy with a highlighter pen. Right, we've all done it. Come on, who doesn't love a highlighter pen? I've got always got one at hand. Go crazy with a highlighter pen, and then we just copy out the textbook. Just write loads and loads and loads of notes. Because if we've got loads of papers, we must be ready for the exam, right? No, doesn't work that way. The point is, we should only be making notes that are useful. Rule 1: never write down anything that you don't understand. So if you don't understand it, making a note of it is completely pointless. Okay, you're not going to revise that later. You're not going to understand it later. It's going to serve no useful purpose. You just wasted 5 minutes. So if you don't understand it, don't write it down. Make yourself a note to go and find out about it, and then that's useful. Okay, so don't write down anything that you don't understand. Use pictures, use keywords, use mind maps, use things that are going to make things more engaging for you. Okay, books versus lectures. If you're in a lecture, never write anything that's on a slide. Ask for a copy of the slides, unless they tell you can't have any copy of the slides, right? But if they make slides available, don't write down what's on the slides. Write down the bits that the tutor says around the slides that you think might be useful, and then you'll get a copy of the slides later on. If you sit there just copying out slides, you're not processing the information properly, you're not engaging with it, you're just writing stuff out, and it's going in one ear and out the other ear. If you're following, you're making notes from a book, I would suggest using something called the Cornell note-taking system. Okay, now the Cornell note-taking system is the best note-taking method that I've ever come across. Right, what it requires you to do is to divide up your page like this. You have a box across the bottom here, you have a box across the top here, and you have one down the side here. Okay, and then you've got the big notes here. What you then do is you put your notes in the main box, and I tend to number mine. So in the textbook, I'll just put a #1, and then here I'll put number 1 with a note. Okay, so if I need to go back to the textbook to find more detail, I can later on. So I know that number 1 relates to number 1 in that chapter. This column here down the side, you just put keynotes. And in the bottom, you put a summary. That's it. Okay, what you then do when you come to revise is you look at the summary, or you look at the keynotes, or the keywords rather, and you just think to yourself, right, okay, how much can I remember from just the keywords? If you can't remember all of it from the keywords, then you read the summary. If you can't remember all of it from the summary, then you go back to the notes. And if you can't make it from the notes, then you go back to the section of the textbook that those notes relate to. So you're challenging your brain to learn in a much more active way by using the Cornell system. I use it. This is one of the papers that I've been reading. I'm doing a master's at the moment, and that's a paper that I read recently, and that's one of my actual sets of notes that I'm using. And what I also do, you see in the top corner there, I've written the word core. So I actually, when I'm reading lots of stuff, I also categorize it. So if it's core stuff I really want to learn, I put the word core on it, and I know when I come back to revise, that's what I definitely need to pick up and need to learn.
Okay, we've got a lot of questions here, and we're going to probably have to come back to them to run through them. So please re-ask them if I've not spotted them. But what's the top box for? Was one of the questions.
So I've got in the top box here. I've got the name of the author, the date, and the title of the paper in this question. So you'd have the chapter of the textbook in the top box.
Do we have a template for that?
Yeah, I've got a template. I can ping that through.
Yeah, if people find that useful, we can send that in the post recording transcript along with some other stuff. So that would be very, very useful. I'm just looking through the questions. How do you know what is useful? Andy's asked, and do you have any tips for those that are a bit neurospicy?
I do, yeah. Can we come back to that at the end? I've got quite a few on Euro. Let's pick that up.
and also, what's your advice for someone who gets very bored reading and is very slow? So let's go to the next point. So I think Bryce has actually, it's like we've got a plant in the audience for every single point here, Jon. How do you differentiate between the process of studying, learning? I've not told him this, but I believe that's your next point.
Oh, nice work, Bryce. Nice work, Bryce. The next point is mistaking studying for learning. There you go. Absolutely. People are often, when it comes to study, they are what I would very politely, because people don't know it's any better, but I will call you busy fools, right? Spend loads and loads of hours studying and then don't get the results because what you've effectively done mentally, what you've effectively done is shifted paper. You've moved it from one side of the desk to the other and back again, right? So you've not got the investment from your time. Don't be a busy fool. Don't shuffle paper. Always study with purpose. So the difference between active studying for me and, just being busy is, do I have a purpose for this session? When you sit down to learn something, what is the outcome that you're looking for? If you've got 30 minutes, what do I want to know at the end of 30 minutes I don't know at the end of the start of that 30 minutes? So it might be I'm doing the pensions exam, and at the end of 30 minutes, I want to understand how the lump sum death benefit allowance works. That's what my measure of success will be. It's not going to be I've read 10 pages. It's going to be, do I understand that principle that I don't understand when I'm going into it? If I do, it's been a success. If I don't, then I'm going to need to come back to it. Okay? What that relates to in terms of this difference between studying and learning, and it's really important, is the amount of processing power that your brain has. You can sit down and you can study for hours, right? So you can sit down on a Sunday morning with a textbook and read and make notes, and at the end of it, you've got a whole wad of notes, right? That's studying. That's not learning. Okay, because your brain is not able to continue to process and to learn continually for that length of time. It can keep working for that length of time, but it can't take all that information in. Realistically, about 40 minutes is going to be where you start tapping out. Now, there's the Pomodoro method is quite a good thing. Named after a tomato. You get the old tomato timers. That's where the name came from. But set yourself a timer. So maybe work for 25 minutes, 5 minutes of break. So literally get up, walk around, let your brain cool down, come back, and then have another 25-minute shift. You're likely to be able to learn more that way rather than just doing aimless study. And we look, I've got a question.
Yeah, we've got a question, but that's a sport thing, isn't it? So they call it task orientated. So you know what the task is, you sit down or you prepare to actually do that task rather than having no endpoint.
Absolutely right. Yeah. And the other thing is, when you do get to the end of your 25 minutes or however long you set for your Pomodoro, before you take your break, set yourself your objective for the next shift. Because then when you come back, you're straight into the task rather than sitting down and going, well, what am I going to do now? Which wastes 5 minutes. So get to the end of that first shift, work out what you're going to do in the next shift, take your break, come back, crack straight into it. Another thing that all this relates, so go on.
No, go for it. No, go for it.
One thing that it relates to is the way that we learn and something called the forgetting curve, which sort of goes back to Bryce's point around learning and revising or practicing. And it's funny actually, because you put a post on LinkedIn yesterday talking about snow, right? And I liken learning to a snow-covered field. If you've got a snow-covered field and it's snowing outside and you walk through that field, you leave footprints, but 10 minutes later, those footprints are gone. Right? The snow's covered them in. If you run up and down that field for 10 minutes, you're going to wear a groove. That groove will take an awful lot longer to fill with snow, and it will still be there in a few hours' time. That's what you need to do with study. You need repetition. Okay, going through it once. Imagine it's like a library. Right? That if you learn something, the library stamps that information with a validity of 1 day. It says this information is important. Hang on to it for 1 day. If I don't come back to you in a day, let it go, forget it. Okay. If you go back and you look at it again in a day's time, it will give you a stamp for a week. And if you go back in a week, it will give you a stamp for a month. Okay. If you go back in a month rather, it will then give you a stamp for a year. But most people don't do that because their exam's gone by then. The point of that being, though, if you are going to get the most actual learning, you need to study it today. And then the first thing you do tomorrow in your study section is review today's content. Then you schedule it for a week's time to come back to it, and then for a month's time to come back to it again. And if you do that, you keep those grooves in the snow and you don't forget the information. Otherwise, what you have to do, this is what I think the point Bryce was making in terms of, do you differentiate between learning and revising? What you end up doing if you don't review it on those timescales is you do all the work now, and then you've got to learn it in the month before the exam because you've forgotten it because you didn't keep running up and down the field. So I would combine the two, the learning and the revising, by doing it today, looking at it again tomorrow, then in a week, then in a month's time. And that will mean that you're actually overlapping the two.
Right, love that. And Jess loves spaced repetition. Right, we've got 2 more mistakes, and we've got a bonus one that you're going to throw in. So let's run through those mistakes, and then I'm guessing we're going to get a load of questions. So let's leave a bit of space for the questions. So mistake number 5.
Okay, briefly, not using varied revision techniques. Okay, there are so many different revision techniques. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you always got. Mix it up, do things differently. Okay, I'll give you some examples. Questions, right? The whole past paper thing, yeah, that's good, but set yourself questions, set each other questions, form study groups, just fire a daily question at each other. Gets the brain active, keeps it going, and makes it much more effective. Learn through multiple modalities. What do I mean by that? I do not buy learning styles, right? It's been thoroughly debunked by psychologists. Doesn't work. Learning styles, no, not having it. But what we do know is that when you learn something, you learn it through multiple different modalities. So if you're reading something, you can get extra learning by reading it out loud, because then you read it and you hear it. If you also write notes out, now you're learning it 3 ways. Okay, so you're seeing it, you're hearing it, and you're interacting with it, and you're writing it all down. So you can link information that way. You can also do the same through locations. And this is a really interesting one. What we know is if you can do at least some of your study, normally the last bit at the desk you're going to sit at when you come to take your exam, you're more likely to remember it sat at that desk than you are if you learned it somewhere else. But you can also link learning to different locations. So if you're going to learn death benefits, go and learn death benefits in Starbucks, right? And then when it comes to exam day, think about Starbucks. You'll remember what you learned in Starbucks. It pulls that information out. So you're storing information in lots of different ways. Make things daft, right? I'm a big fan of this. This is famous, right? I've been using the Cookie Monster now for about 15 years. When I do one-to-one training with people, I put the Cookie Monster on a chair and I have them present to the Cookie Monster. Okay, so if there's a subject that you're really struggling to remember, present it to the Cookie Monster, because I can promise you on exam day, you will remember how stupid you felt talking to the Cookie Monster, and you'll remember what it was you were talking to him about. So sing it to the cats, tell the children, right? So think about it when you're chopping up tomatoes or whatever, something that's daft that isn't going to make it more memorable. It will definitely help. And then one more that I really like as well is try and mix up your learning a little bit. So don't just learn in a linear fashion. If you're going to sit down and when it comes to revision time, you've got maybe an hour to revise, do 10 minutes on that subject, 10 minutes on that subject, 10 minutes on that subject, try and put them all together. And that, by doing that, you're kind of forcing your brain to create much more complex networks, which make it easier to retrieve information later. I've heard the same with taste using chewing gum, for example. Yeah, absolutely, Olivia. It's called state dependency. They learned it from deep sea divers. They got a load of divers to go underwater and try and remember some words. And then they got half of them to remember them on land and half of them to remember underwater. Those who remembered them underwater remembered significantly more than the ones who tried to remember them on land, because you remember things better. You can link it to sights, smells. I personally use lip balm. So when I'm studying, if I put a lip balm on that's got a particular smell to it, wear that same lip balm on the exam day, that'll help you remember stuff. And one technique I've used for years that I tell students is a trigger song, right? And I got told off by a student about this because now every time she hears the song that she used to like, she thinks about RO4. So with apologies, take a song that you don't hear very often and not one that's precious to you, please. But before you start studying, play the song. At the end of your study session, play the same song. Then on exam day, before the exam, play the song through 2 or 3 times, and it will start the process of bringing all that memory back, because you'll link the memories to the song.
But you'll hate the song. It's like that
You
Jet
probably
2
will
song.
hate the song, yeah. So,
I can't listen to that Jet 2 song anymore. Mistake number 6, John. Come on.
Cramming. Leaving everything to the last minute. Come on, be honest. Who does that? Lots of you. I know you do. Forgetting curve, right? We just covered that. You know, you're not going to have time for that 1 day, 1 week, 1 month. So what's going to happen is you might get through the exam by cramming it, but then I promise you, you won't remember it. Now, that's fine if you're doing an exam you never need to know about again. But if you're going to end up going on to do advanced exams, you're going to have to relearn it all, right? So if you're learning RO3 right now by cramming, and then you're going to want to do AF1 down the line, you're going to have to learn everything all over again. Whereas if you end up planning in advance, you won't end up doing that.
Some great comments there. I've got a question. It's a good time for this question. So there's a lot of fear with the taking exams. I hear a lot of people say, I'm overwhelmed. Like, you kind of leave it until the last minute. How do you avoid that?
Do you know what? I have a recurring dream, right? My recurring dream is I've got an exam next week and I haven't begun prep for it. It's a natural thing, right? It's that dream for me is because I have anxiety about something else, and it kind of relates to that. But it's a perfectly common thing. You're heading towards something that is potentially quite important to your career. It's looming up on you, and you think, well, how am I gonna get through this? The one thing we know though is that the earlier that you start, the easier it will be, right? So I do Ironman triathlon. I've got one in 5 months. I only started training 2 weeks ago, and I'm hating myself already. Like, properly hating myself already, because I haven't given myself as long as I should have done. The earlier you start, the easier it will get. I promise you that. So if you want to try and overcome some of that kind of panic, then start earlier is the right answer. Or give yourself more time. Because remember, you can book most of these exams in when you want to. So give yourself a bit longer. The other thing, though, is if you are going to be overwhelmed, cram properly. Right? So what I mean by that is, don't cram on the night before the exam. Give yourself a couple of nights beforehand, because we learn things when we're asleep, not when we're awake. When you're asleep, what happens is that your brain, a part of your brain that's responsible for memory, runs around and tidies things up and puts it in the right boxes. It's like 2.5-year-old daughter that Evelyn mentions there. When your daughter goes to bed and the house is carnage and you have to put all the stuff away, it's best to be done when the little one's asleep. So when you're asleep, your brain does that job for you. It tidies all the information up. Doing it the night before the exam, you're not going to get a proper night's sleep. It's not going to have time to tidy it up. You're not going to learn it as well as you can. So that's point 1. Point 2, make sure that you are picking your subjects. If you're cramming and you've only got a limited amount of time to cram, look for the areas where you're going to get the most return on investment. Okay? And one of the ways that I do that, and I probably shouldn't tell you this, but I am anyway. If you're looking at a textbook, work out how many pages you've got to read per mark in the exam, and then concentrate on the areas where there are fewer pages per mark if you're going to be cramming it. So if you've only got to read 2 pages per mark, that's the one to start with, as opposed to one where you've got to read 10 pages per mark. Right? So if you're cramming, make sure you get the best out of your time. Mix it up, see above, different study methods. Test yourself. Absolutely test yourself. So questions, if you're going to be cramming, asking yourself questions, getting other people to ask you questions, using example questions, that's probably the best way to cram. And above all, and I think this is a really important point, right? Just remember, and I know this is such a hard thing to do, but we've all been there, it's just an exam, right? At the end of the day, it is just an exam. And if you miss out, there will be another chance. There will be another time. Okay, so don't let it become something that is so vital and so important to you that it becomes all consuming. There's always another chance.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. Just a question. Are you giving Bryce your mistakes because he keeps asking the same questions that I'm going to come on to next?
I'm not.
Bryce,
It's
are you a ringer, Bryce? That's the
Right,
question.
just simpatico.
So,
We're on
so
the
how would you approach a reset? I think this was going to be your bonus point.
It was, yeah. It's my Brucey bonus. It's my Brycey bonus. There you go. Right. How do we approach a reset? First mistake that people make with a reset is they concentrate on all the things that they got wrong the first time and ignore all the bits they got right the first time. That's why they go on to fail again. That's it, right? The point being that if you go into an exam, let's say it's a multiple choice exam, you go in and you need to get 65 out of 100 to pass it, and you get 63. And you get that little printout at the end that says you absolutely bombed out on learning outcome 4 and learning outcome 5. And there was lots of marks available in those. So what do? You go away and you concentrate on learning outcome 4, learning outcome 5, you drill them, you go back, you take it again, and you bomb out. And you go, well, why? I got all of them right on learning outcome 4 and 5. Yeah, but now you've missed out on learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2. Because what you've done is the forgetting curve has not been reinforced. So when you're just concentrating on the areas you missed out on last time, you're not now reinforcing the learning for the areas that you did well in last time. So don't neglect the bits that you got right in the pursuit of the bits that you got wrong. Top up the bits that you got right whilst learning more about the bits you got wrong. That'll get you through a reset.
Okay, we've got so many good questions here. How can I use AI to support my studying? Rakesh has asked.
Yeah, great question. My tip on that is trust but verify, right? So AI is notoriously flawed in what it says, okay? So you will find that when you ask it for certain things, I'll give an example of this in the book, but I asked it to explain a particular rule, and it said, yes, this rule, blah, 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 and it picked something completely different. Okay, so it can be really useful to help you, but don't 100% trust it. How I tend to do it is I ask it to give me structure. So I would say, I'm looking at this. This is what the syllabus looks like. How might I break down my study? This is how many weeks I've got. These are the subjects I need to learn. How would I go about putting together a study plan? And I use Copilot for that. It's really effective. I also just, if I've written a little paragraph, I will put that into Copilot and I'd say, how does this look? And it will say, oh yeah, but have you thought about this? It might link you out to another website that will give you some tips there. Just don't put everything into Copilot. Don't put all of your hopes into Copilot.
Yeah. Okay.
Or into any form of AI, because AI is flawed.
Okay, let's run through these. I'm going to give you 30 seconds on each. What is the best method to approach the multiple response questions? They are evil and ruin my life. That's very dramatic.
Yeah, no, they are horrible. So there's always either 2 or 3, pretty much. It's never one. It actually says at the top of the question, there is more than one right answer. There's very seldom 4 right answers. So if you've got 1 and you're not sure about the second, pick it. If you've got 3 and you're not sure about the 4th, don't pick it. If you've got 2 and you're not sure about the 3rd, toss a coin. The answer to it is make sure that you pass the exam before you get to multiple response questions, then you won't have a problem. That genuinely, and I'm not being flippant, but when I say that, I used to run a team of super techies, and I used to give them RO exams, and not even they would always get every one of the multiple response questions right, except that you are going to get some of them wrong, and try and make it irrelevant by making sure you don't get the others wrong.
I love that. Right. If you remember stuff while you're asleep, is it better to study at night?
Yes, up to a point. Absolutely. Really good point. I tend to suggest doing like half an hour of just revision. So just going over my Cornell notes about an hour before bed. Okay. So you don't want to go to bed with it whirring through your mind, because then your mind will be too busy, you won't sleep. But about an hour before bed, half an hour or so of going through these, and that will just put it in the right boxes for your brain to tidy up when you're sleeping.
Okay, love this question. Utilizing all of the mentioned techniques for learning effectively, what would be the least amount of study hours required per AF exam? Appreciates personal. It's an efficiency question, this, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. When I was taking mine, I was doing them 3 at a time because I just wanted to get through them all as quickly as I could. And I am what I would describe as a mini-max student. So I do as little work as I can possibly get away with for the maximum return. And if I can get 65% on a 65% exam, that does me, right? But not everybody's that way. It comes down very much to how much of it you need to understand, what your own speed of learning is. I think you just need to understand yourself on that one.
Okay. Jess has said, I think I need a summary email of what has been mentioned today. That's good news, Jess, because we will send a summary email with the recording and some of the assets. I'll come on to the book, Jon. Don't worry. And is all of this info in the book? Yes, it is. But I'll come on to the book at the end. Don't worry. Chris has used AI to do practice calculations in the past. You done that, Jon?
Right, so I put in my tax calculation into Copilot and ChatGPT this week, and I'd already done my tax calculation. I know about income tax. And Copilot was out to the tune of 250%, and ChatGPT made a very fundamental multiplication error. It said X times Y equals Z, and it absolutely didn't. So be careful on that one.
Okay. Olivia said, I think I turned nocturnal at uni. It was easy to study with a quiet house. Interesting.
Yeah, so there's some interesting research about this around. Some people are what are called larks. Some people are night owls. And there's a book, we'll put it out with the notes. There's a book around this, around how you can work out what is the best time of day for you. What is interesting, though, is if you're somebody who tends to be more awake in the morning, if you want to be creative, you're better off doing work in the evening, because when your brain starts to get tired, it breaks down barriers and it becomes more creative. If you're somebody who's weary in the morning, you'll probably be more creative in the morning. So you can play to your own. You've
also not mentioned pink noise, Jon, which is surprising.
Game changer for me, pink noise. I've got my headphones on my desk right now. Literally, I put the headphones on. I've got the Calm app, and I ask it to play me pink noise for an hour. It's just basically like white noise, but at a different frequency. And I find that the whole world disappears for an hour. And I just get absolute hyper focus. And that's one of the neurospicy tips.
Yeah,
actually, pick up some of those now. That's probably a good point to there's quite a lot of people asking for those. So it depends on what your own form of neurospicy is. Okay. So I'm autistic. I find that I can hyper focus to extreme. So I can sit down at 6 o'clock in the morning and finish at 10 o'clock at night. And if my mind is engaged in that day, I will just go straight the way through. But I'm not learning, I'm working. What I then need to do is to make sure I'm scheduling my revision after that to make sure it goes in. So again, not confusing working with learning. The most requests that I get, though, in terms of neuro is for people who are ADHD. And I thought about this before I came on. I just got a few notes. So first thing, the Feynman notebook system that I mentioned earlier on is really effective. So you get a piece of paper, you write the heading that you want to consider at the top of it, and then you write down what you know about that subject as if you're explaining it to a 10-year-old. That will really get under the skin of how much you actually understand of it. Okay, but it will also get your brain fired up and get your brain into that particular subject. Okay, once you've done that, pose yourself some questions, because again, the brain likes questions. So if you ask yourself questions, it stops the distraction of the work. So if you're just reading something, you can be distracted off all over the place. What my wife describes as squirrels. There'll be a squirrel here and a squirrel there, and you go off chasing it. Whereas if you've got that question, you're more likely to stay on track. Reading aloud is really helpful for ADHD. Again, these are generalizations, all of these, right? Not all of these will work for everyone. But reading aloud can help. Moving about can help as well. So if you're able to actually study as you're moving around, then do that. Some people I know have standing desks with a treadmill underneath it, and they'll read while they're actually walking. That actually has two benefits. One, it keeps you busy and keeps you moving, which might help with the ADHD. But two, it promotes blood flow to the brain, which also promotes more learning. There's a massive overlap between ADHD and dyslexia, and between ADHD and dyspraxia. Dyspraxia being motor function. Not a lot of people who are ADHD necessarily realize that they're also dyslexic and or dyspraxic. So if you are dyslexic, and there is a co-presentation there, what you'll often find is you have something called Erlen syndrome. And Erlen syndrome is where you're reading a book and the words move around the page. People often think that is dyslexia. It's not, it's a related condition. But changing the color of the page, changing the font size can be really helpful. And also looking at tinted glasses. And you can actually have something called a colorimetry assessment, which will tell you the best color tinted glasses for your eyes. Talk to an optician about that one. So that'll help. Cornell notes will definitely help for ADHD. Taking regular breaks, so the Pomodoro method that we looked at earlier on. Making great use of technology, so speech to text. If you do have dyspraxia and handwriting is not a strength, use speech to text and record your notes that way. Don't beat yourself up. Really super important, because that can be a real problem. I know when my neurospicy brain gets going, I beat myself up and it's not going as I would like it to. And it sounds a little bit woo-woo, but mindfulness. Mindfulness is massive, right? There's so many benefits. Make use of mindfulness if you can. Just walking in nature without your phone can just really bring that you right back down and let you go back to study afterwards. Hopefully there's something in there.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to wrap it up there because we're out of time. So Jon, massive thank you. I've got a few promos here. So what we're going to do is we're going to send an email with the recording, some of the key points. I think there's 3 questions that we didn't answer, so I'll take a note of those and try and answer them as well. We're also going to send you a scorecard to complete that Jon's actually helped us build, and we're going to give away 10 free copies of Jon's book to people that complete those. So have a go at the scorecard. Let us know what you think. If you're considering taking exams in 2025, you're not doing it with NextGen, feel free to speak to us. You know, RO1 to RO6 involved in our membership, £15 a month, great value. And the AFs, I think you should look at as well, because, you know, we have a great track record along with Jon in helping people pass these exams. But yeah, good luck, and hopefully you found that very useful.